Global warming. The great debate heated up recently when an email exchange among several scientists came to light that cast some aspersions on statistical manipulation. So it continues here at INSEAD, this global debate. And we have with us today finance professor Theo Vermaelen and the Paul Dubrule Professor of Sustainable Development, Paul Kleindorfer. Gentlemen, opposite sides of the coin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Let's get it right going. Theo. You have a problem with some of the statistics being used to support the climate change call to action. Objections, why?
But it's not just about the statistics, it's about the whole, I think, approach to research. If you read those emails, it's not like a debate I expect between the research, it's more like a debate between politicians to try to push a certain point of view.
This is the East Anglia University
East Anglia University view, and they try to go at great lengths to basically prove their point, including, I think, some evidence of manipulation of data. You can see this is a graph that basically shows the climate changes between year 1000 and the recent period until 1998. The 20th century is really an unprecedented period of climate increases, global warming, that's the whole idea. And it kind of challenges the old view that basically the medieval period here in 1200, 1300, was the period actually that most people thought was the period of high global warming. But if you look at this graph carefully, there are two colors here. One is the red color. The red color basically goes from 1900 to 1998 here, and these are the actual temperatures measured by instruments, right? Now, before 1850, people cannot measure actual temperatures. So the blue line here, or the black line you can call it, is essentially based on proxies. So scientists use proxies for temperature. So what's happened here is that presumably after 1980, this proxy went down. Now you don't want to show a graph when the proxy goes down. So what you do, you hide it and you basically replace it by the actual temperatures, and then you get the picture that this is a big increase. But of course, if the proxy does not fit the actual temperature, then the proxy is meaningless, and this whole graph doesn't make any sense. You see? Now, what for me the most disturbing thing is that this graph is published in the IPCC report on the first page. It's endorsed by 40 or 50 scientists. I mean, I cannot imagine that none of these scientists would have asked what happened to the black line after 1980.
Paul, you were at Copenhagen. Governments were making policy changes. This missing black line, was that a big issue?
No. The first day of the Copenhagen event had the head of IPCC explain the events surrounding the East Anglia Climatic Research Unit event, and suggesting, although he didn't get into that it would have been very unusual indeed for them to have had a conspiracy, a worldwide conspiracy to if you will, to change, to reflect in their data or their assumptions and so forth, something different than what they felt. And what they do feel is, and this is true of climate skeptics as well as climate believers, if you will, climate change believers, is three things. One is CO2, and the measurement of CO2 has increased dramatically since 1730, 1750, when we started to be able to take measurements with respect to it, and most dramatically in the last 50 years. No one doubts that. It's measurable, very measurable, and accurately measurable in the interim. So that one is clear. Secondly, no one doubts that there has been temperature increase in the last 100 years. That since 1905, 1906 to 2005, where we have very good measurements on this process. Particular point that is crucial to the discussion that Theo and I are having here is the third point. And the third point is there is disagreement about whether, in fact, the change that we see is in fact a human change fostered by greenhouse gases, which are clearly on the significant
cars,
increase,
refrigerators,
or whether
like
in fact this is a part of some other natural process. But I would say, just as a non-climate scientist, it would be a remarkable coincidence. Just from my point of view, if 9 of the 10 hottest years in the recorded history occurred in the past decade, didn't have something to tell us about what was going on.
The problem with the climate change, guys, that they confuse T statistic with R square. You could have a very significant relationship between A and B, but it doesn't mean that A is explained by B. This is the problem here. It's about what percentage of the volatility is explained by this variable. I can plot a graph of the stock market, and that's going to exactly match the graph of temperature changes, because the stock market also went up since 1950, right? Do I then say, if you want to lower temperature, let's lower the stock market? Is that the answer? So you cannot just, like, two variables are correlating, saying one basically causes completely the other.
I mean, what kind of issues have you found, and maybe both of you, on this anti-global warming?
What is certain is that we're beyond peak oil. We have to find another source of energy. What is certain is that CO2 has gone up significantly. What is uncertain about is what just exactly the impact, and it's also certain, by the way, that that's the result of human activity, the CO2. What's uncertain is just exactly what are the other drivers of climate change which we're seeing, including variable weather patterns and so on. If we put a lot of money into something that is not the cause, then that's in some sense wasted money. On the other hand, the problem is that we face such significant uncertainties at this point that we could say, well, let's not do anything until we know the facts. My view about that is not going to work. So there has to be some, let's call it political action and public action agenda behind it that says, look, that recognizes the scientific uncertainty. There's no question that we have to recognize that and not, let's say, fool ourselves into thinking we know answers that we don't know. But secondly, that sees the huge stakes of irreversible damage if we're wrong about not combating climate change, and the relatively small stakes, if we act together, of combating climate change, of moving to a low-carbon economy, since we have to anyway.
Since '98, there's been no global warming, right? Every meteorological institute has shown the last 11 years there's been no global warming. Now, this is completely against the prediction of the IPCC. In their 1990 report, they predict that every 10 years, temperatures will increase by 0.15 to 0.3 degrees. That has not happened. Well, you can say, well, it's a temporary blip. Well, my argument is, if you make a prediction in a theory, then the quality of the theory depends on the predictions. Some people now are having models saying there's going to be global cooling. Now, suppose global cooling happens. Suppose this is the beginning of the new ice age. Now, look out the window. Much more likely. You cannot just make a decision if you don't know which way things are going, and committing, like in the Copenhagen Agreement, committing to $100 billion per year to developing countries. In present value, that's trillions of dollars that's going to be committed to developing countries, maybe to invest in the wrong project. Isn't there a better way to help developing countries than doing this?
But it could create jobs. It could have other economic benefits that are actually good.
Well, I'm generally of the belief that this particular matter is beyond the normal market forces. And I would say under conditions of uncertainty, that's exactly the point that the leaders of the world are trying to get us to see, which is that we cannot have consequentialist reasoning here alone. We have to have it in the near term. Of course, we can't just throw money out the door without knowing what the purpose is. Similarly, if we believe that in spite of the uncertainty, we should keep, as the Copenhagen Accord concluded, with about 187 of the 193 countries there subscribing to it, that we should try to stay within 2 degrees. Now, why is that as a statement? It isn't because there are, let's say, clear economic returns associated with it. It's because, and maybe they are believing the wrong thing, but they're consulting tens of thousands of scientists, not just East Anglia, not just Penn State, but all over the world. And they're concluding that the risks, the huge the possible disastrous consequences that could materialize from unanticipated consequences, from the changing weather patterns, from droughts, from food, from famine issues, and all the rest of that, which is a part of the scenarios that are painted from rising sea levels. Their belief is that those uncertainties and the downside of those are really worth avoiding. Unless business gets in front of that and gets some reasonable and uniform treatment across the planet, we are going to see real economic losses materializing from it. I don't know whether the science is going to ultimately tell us that we were right in thinking the IPCC fourth assessment is right, but it does seem to me that the nations of the world see such downside to not preparing that they are going to. And they're right now doing it piecemeal, And the piecemeal approach is going to have huge negative consequences, from my point of view, for business activity and economic value creation.
Let me just ask one quick question before you jump in with your response here. I got the sense that business was not all that excited about what the Copenhagen Accords were, or am I wrong?
The reason they're not very pleased with the Copenhagen Accords is because it leaves such significant uncertainty on the table. It leaves no targets. The worst of all possible worlds, in some sense, is to have the most developed parts of the planet subscribing partly to one or another target or cap and trade system, and the rest of the world not. When that happens, you are going to see massive migrations of economic activity, not fueled by efficiency, but fueled by carbon tax differences. That's what business was, and especially European business, was very concerned about.
But that's like saying the government has made a bad decision imposing a cost on the Western companies, so therefore now, in order to just do away with the decision, let's impose the same cost to the others. I mean, this is kind of your reasoning that, we have increased the cost, but that's kind of the argument. But my argument basically, maybe we should question the whole cap and trade system in Europe. Maybe we should abolish the whole thing, and we should not basically try to impose cost on European players based on a theory that, according to me, is rejected by the last 11 years of data. And I think, therefore, you should be, government should maybe reconsider this. Even the scientific community said that whatever money has been allocated in Copenhagen is not enough to do that, right? It's not enough. Whatever has been done is not enough.
Not enough yet, no.
Not enough. But then it's like building half a bridge. Does it make sense to build half a bridge? No. You build a whole bridge or you build no bridge. Who has an incentive to build half a bridge? The bridge builders. They have an incentive. So you either have to commit fully. You can have to say, well, I can have so much investment that I can bring it down to 2 degrees, but it's extremely unlikely. But otherwise, it makes no sense to take half measures.
I look at the battle thus far as being half won. It's true that science must continue and must provide better answers. But, to say that the 90% uncertainty, that's roughly what the IPCC scientists, tens of thousands of them, concluded in their very likely conclusion, against the 10%, to put the weight on the 10% is somehow to miss the type 2 error importance here. It seems to me that's critical to what, you could say what you like, but I just think, Theo, that you have to see that the uncertainty is somewhat asymmetric. The uncertainty is more on the side of the climate change not taking place. Of course, there is a possibility that 20 years from now we're going to wake up in a new glacial period. That's not what folks are saying. That's not what climate scientists are saying. They're saying this next 100 years, whoever you talk to, Hansen or any of these experts let's say in reasonable positions in government, in the National Science Foundation and so on, what they're saying, uncorrupted by emails and all the rest of it, is they're saying, on balance, this is definitely going up, the temperature. The last 10 years, you could say what you like about things going down, but when they still are the 9 of the 10 hottest years of the last 100 years, it would be a remarkable coincidence if that didn't have something to do with climate change.
The next IPCC report is going to come out in 2013. At that moment in time, they're no longer going to be able to hide. They cannot have a graph stopping in 2000. At that moment, the whole world will see that their predictions that they're making are wrong. And then we start thinking again. So now everybody is believing that the IPCC as the ultimate truth. They don't have a crystal ball. No one has a crystal ball here. So no one should say it's not because 10,000 people say that this is true, that therefore it's true. The truth is based on the predictions. You make a prediction and we test your prediction. The predictions were made and they're wrong. I mean, they don't work for the last 10 years. So then you have to revise and say, listen, and this is admitted by the email exchange. In the emails, one of the guys says, it's a travesty. We cannot explain the decline in the last 10 years. It's a travesty. A travesty basically meaning this is inconsistent with our models. What are we going to do? Now, they're not panicking yet because they still have until 2013. Maybe there's a jump, although this year doesn't look like you're going to add a data point to your cause. But maybe there's a change in the future that looks like they're going to be saving their theory. But it looks like there is no, if you make a prediction, this is what we do in finance, right? If I make a prediction of a model and it is not confirmed by the data, the model is wrong. Who is going to give them billions of dollars in research money if they have to say, well, all of these conclusions we had were wrong? How ridiculous will they look for the whole world? I mean, they cannot change their minds. So I think this is the problem. This is why there are more than 400 published academic papers by climate scientists that are against human-caused global warming. This is Steve Levitt, is an economics professor from Chicago. They're on his website. These people are not heard in the IPCC reports. Why not? Because the IPCC reports are made by 50 people that all have to agree like politicians at the end of the day on a common statement. And the common statement is the interest of the community is to promote this whole climate change industry depends on promoting of man-made global warming.
Well, here is the particular problem that you are asked to resolve, in which I think climate skeptics, all 25 of them or whatever that authored the NIPCC report versus the thousands that were involved in the IPCC report, they basically conclude that focusing attention on the 10% or 20% chance of being wrong about this warrants overriding the 80% probability that climate change scientists are right. And that particular problem is one where it's a matter of risk appetite and risk preference and so on. But I think the people of the planet have now spoken, and they've spoken very clearly that they do not like an 80% chance of catastrophic consequences to future generations. If we're wrong and we have permafrost melting, we have the ocean currents moving, we have the weather variability patterns that are now affecting Africa and Australia. And these are people who were very clearly vocal in Copenhagen about those effects. If indeed those effects are not just natural variations, but as they believe, potentially catastrophic warning signs of climate change impending, some of us have a view that maybe we should wait a bit longer. I personally think that's the cost of waiting are going to be too large given the possible outcomes on the downside.
I don't know, that's like any investment project. The longer you wait, the more information you get, and then you decide to invest. I don't think you can just say that not waiting is not an optimal strategy without calculating the cost.
The reason is because of the actual latency time of CO2 in the air, and the longer we wait to actually combat it, the higher that moves into the 450 and 500 ppm range. And to the extent that indeed these are forcing factors that are responsible, to the extent that that's true, you would in fact be out of luck if you waited. That's the issue.
You know, the Catholic Church told Galileo that he should not doubt the science also in the 15th century, that the Earth is the center of the world, and 95% of scientists agree with that. Now, he disagreed with that. He's disagreed with that, and I think that people should have, is not because 90% of the scientific community agrees with something that is also right, because this scientific community has no crystal ball. Why would I commit myself to trillions of dollars of wealth transfer for something that is not settled, that has massive uncertainty? That's the question, and where I suspect a lot of politicians, there's a nice quote here from one of the scientists, you say the climate scientist, Professor von Stork, I don't know whether you know him, from a German guy. So he was quoted in the Wall Street Journal. He went to a meeting with Mr. Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, in March. Mr. Rasmussen told him, I quote here, in front of all these climate scientists, I need to push the process in the right direction. I need fixed targets and certain figures, and not too many considerations and risks and things like that. So here are these guys telling scientists, you better fall in line because we have this political agenda. And this is my concern here, that this whole process is corrupted by politics. How many people know that there's been no global warming since 1998? How many people know? Nobody. Nobody tells them. The media is quiet about it. Nobody knows.
Wait a minute here.
Do you know?
No, I don't know, but I'm not sure you can sit there and say that there hasn't been.
No, this is a scientific fact. There are 8 meteorological institutes in the world, and they've calculated since 1998 there has been no global warming. The temperatures are basically lower today than in 1998.
Yeah, but that's not the way to say there's no global warming, my dear Theo.
But it's not gone up.
There are decadal effects that are associated with El Nino and La Nina. And those decadal effects are there. Let me again repeat the fact, just for everyone to hear completely clearly. If 9 out of the 10 last years are the hottest amongst the 10 hottest years in recorded meteorological history, it would be a remarkable coincidence, Theo, if this were not associated with climate change. You quoted Galileo. Let me just make my point briefly about this in terms of another 17th century philosopher, mathematician, scientist, Blaise Pascal. People asked him why he believed he behaved more or less in a reasonably Christian way, that being the religion of the day in France. He said, well, my answer is this, that it causes me some discomfort. I have to listen to some boring sermons on Sunday occasionally. But, you know, if there is a God, then presumably I'll get rewarded for that. On the other hand, you know, if I don't go to church and there's a God, well, you know, there may be some rather strong penalties.
That's a very low-cost activity.
No. But, you know, I'm just saying that his argument was an uncertainty argument. He said, there's no proof that there's a God. Let me tell you why I'm engaged in this activity. It's because, and perhaps this was just instrumental logic on his part, perhaps he even was a moral fellow in his own right, but I would say that's the key issue. And if the planet buys onto that issue, and I believe it has, for a lot of reasons, not just to do with temperature, but these droughts and health effects and the signs that are materializing all over the planet, that something is fundamentally going on here. If the planet buys onto that, then I believe for business sake, we need to get some uniform agreement about what we are going to do to have a reasonable price of carbon as an input across the planet. If we have some of the parts of the planet not, and some of the parts of the planet that do, we are going to have chaos. And that is what I think are the huge risks for business. And it seems to me to get beyond the notion of, well, if that's where the planet is going, I'd like to see them do this intelligently. I don't see any grand cost to this from moving there, since we're already beyond peak oil. I think we move there, but we move there intelligently. And if we don't move there intelligently, that is where I think, Theo, we are going to see really large losses.
Gentlemen, we should kind of leave it here, I think. Maybe we'll get some other responses from people who watch this. That would be interesting. We'll continue the debate, I hope, through cyberspace. So thank you very much, Professor Vermaelen and Professor Kleindorfer, for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Shelley.
Pleasure, Shelley.